This is the story all about how CSS was made. It's 2007. South Africa win the rugby. Facebook has 14 million users. The internet is up and running with its memes. And the kings of transparent shiny have everyone excited about their new phone. The iPhone was not the first smartphone, much like the iPod was not the first MP3 player, but its dominance and subsequent popularity make it a distinct landmark in the history of mobile web. Using the internet on a phone could go from a novelty to a practical habit, and then for many the default way to go online. The internet they are accessing, however, is built for big wide screens, so users need to keep pinch zooming, meaning it's quite a pain to fill out forms or do anything useful. Suddenly web design and development face a new problem. Your site would now be viewed on two radically different screen sizes and orientations, but neither could be ignored. The first trend was for a separate mobile site, meaning teams would now maintain two sites. This still often failed to deliver, with the mobile version a slimmed down version offering less features. As new tablet devices started to appear, it was becoming clear you can't just build a new site for each screen, and web pages would need to become more flexible. In 2010, Ethan Marcotte published an article in a list apart titled Responsive Web Design, which would define websites for the next decade. In it, he suggested taking advantage of media queries and grid systems, which were new concepts, to make sites that adapted to the screen width but retained the same content and functionality. As the name suggests, your content is responding to its screen width rather than serving different websites, and offered a new version of websites entirely as squishier, fluid media. Much like table-based sites, the introduction of grid systems were another example of devs trying to solve problems without the tools they needed. By making a series of container divs with floats and percentage widths, elements could hang together and appear like a column grid, and then different media queries would collapse together. It would do for now. There were a flurry of column-based layout frameworks doing the round, but the most popular was the Bootstrap 12 column grid used by Twitter, which eventually made it into the still popular Bootstrap CSS library. CSS libraries were just one of the many tools emerging to make CSS development easier. In 2008, the Firebug plugin was available in Firefox, a game changer that made it the developer's browser of choice. It was an innovation that directly influenced the creation of developer tools and would appear in the new Google Chrome browser in 2010, which quickly took hold of the market. CSS Tricks emerged at this time, the go-to forum for CSS tips and guides, and it was the perfect time to be discussing CSS. The features and specs of CSS had been quietly in development over the past decade, ever since CSS2 was released in the late 90s, but had now separated into distinct modules. There would no longer be a big one-hit release, but instead gradual progression of modules. The band had gone solo. This would enable features to come out sooner and browsers to adopt them quicker. However, a sudden emergence of new features around the turn of the decade in colors, selectors, layout effects, and fonts had been labeled as if they were a single release, and ended up being classed as CSS3. Yeah, that's right, CSS3 never really was, but nobody suffered for believing so. Having this new label gave developers a new badge for their CV, something to show they knew the new stuff. Academies and courses could promote a CSS3 course, and developers considered updating their sites with the new CSS3 they kept hearing about. It also arrived just in time for the latest design trend. Among other vague terms referring to a general thing was Web 2.0. Rather than a defined set of features, it more encapsulated a feeling about web taking a leap forward with things like dynamic web pages using RSS and Ajax, blogging platforms, social media, apps, and the mobile web. There was also a shiny new look going around courtesy of the kings of shiny. If your site didn't use the reflected logo, beveled corners, drop shadows, and lighting effect edges, then it was probably out of date. This was helped by the new CSS box shadow, border radius, and linear gradient background properties. Among other cool new features generally associated with CSS3, we got font face, finally allowing us to move beyond 5 web-safe font families. We got advanced pseudo selectors like nth child. We got opacity on elements, plus we got animations, transforms, and transitions, allowing CSS devs to attempt Flash-like motion in their designs. Flash, meanwhile, was staring into the abyss, since iPad wouldn't support it. Despite the tremendous gifts offered by CSS3, there was a sting in the tail, forcing us down a path of no return. Firstly, the new features were initially released with browser prefixes, allowing people to begin testing them as a soft release. But before the non-prefix version made it out, eager devs had run wild implementing prefixed CSS into bundles, boilerplates, and production websites. Tutorials explained which prefixes to use like it was just a new feature, and once more making your site work across all browsers was tricky. Supporting new features required tools like Modernizer.js library, the HTML5 shim, and big packages like the HTML5 boilerplate. Coupled with a grid library, you now needed a lot of setup to start a web project, and the age of big configurations was only just getting started. In 2011 we got Grunt, a JavaScript task runner, which would be followed in 2013 with Gulp. These tools allow transformations on CSS like compiling from Sass, minification, combining files, and adding the now essential browser prefixes. CSS had made its deal with the devil, and would be tied to the increasingly powerful JavaScript from here on. The diversity of browsers presented fresh challenges for developers, but supporting older IE was still the main problem. In fact, faith in browsers to reliably uphold standards and responsibly roll out W3C features was such that in 2013 the WASP committee disbanded, citing no continued reason to exist. CSS was now too mainstream and widely used to worry about falling out of favour. The web passed 1 billion sites in 2014. The great leap in features and solutions had empowered developers massively, but challenges remained about the ubiquity of samey designs and the increasingly complex developer environments. In the final chapter, we'll look at how CSS gained long-awaited features and embraced JavaScriptification in the age of frameworks.